So if I could have my slides up to talk to, that would be great. I'm going to be talking about the future of energy management, which is actually based on a 6-month study that we produced, where we surveyed 210 corporate energy decision makers in 11 different countries. And we interviewed around 30 industry veterans, so people who've been involved in energy management for at least 25 years. And the reason for that was to really avoid reinventing the wheel. So I'm going to power through this, and then I'm going to hand over to Brendan Tapley, who's going to give the perspective from Eon. So looking at their perspective on the future of energy management. We'll then have Clay Nesler joining us from Johnson Controls, giving some examples, and I think a life in the day of somebody doing all of this, which I think is going to be a really interesting story. And then we'll have the panel debate, which will also include Ian Kelly, the CEO of Matrix, which is an interesting private equity-backed energy services firm. So let me get started. And as I go through this, I'd like all of you in the room to think about what are the energy systems that your organisation is involved in, and to what extent are you actually integrating them to turn them into something that is much more strategic than the way you've managed energy in the past. And the reason for that is because our research found that the future of energy management is about large-scale energy systems integration. And you know, this really reflects the fact that energy is highly fragmented, as we heard this morning. It reflects the fact that there are deep concerns about energy prices. If you think about energy prices increasing at a compound annual growth rate of 10%, that means they're going to be doubling within about 6.5 years. And this is also about risk reduction, it's about cost reduction, and interestingly, I think, as we heard from IKEA this morning, it could actually be about generating revenues for your organisation. So I'm going to answer 4 questions for you. Firstly, what are the macro trends that we see that are actually forcing the pace of change in energy management? Secondly, what evidence is there that this is actually taking place? So we'll go back to our survey data. And then, you know, why is large-scale energy systems integration the future of energy management? You know, why is it that we are actually all going to go on this journey? And then finally, to really kind of tee up the panel, what is it that the energy services firms have got to offer, and why are they getting involved? So let me get started, and I'm going to power through this section because we already had the panel debate. So here is some data on energy prices, electricity prices, sorry. And you can see in the UK that over the 2005 to 2010 period, the compound annual growth rate was 13%. When you start thinking about this in terms of planning over the medium term, you are talking about total cost doubling over a 5-year period. It is not surprising that people are thinking about taking a different approach. And this was backed up by actually all of you. So all of you in the room who participated in this event survey, 54% of you, if you do the maths, said that we expect the compound annual growth rate in the UK to be more than 5%. So we understand this issue. And, you know, the trend is not your friend. If you look at that, 55% do actually expect UK energy prices to be higher than in other geographies. So clearly we have a problem here. But then there are also opportunities. And, you know, here is one of the other business model drivers. So the potential to have innovation in terms of integrated energy systems, generation, smart appliances, new types of energy using or energy storing assets like electric vehicles are starting to disrupt the way that people make money around the energy ecosystem. And I know some of you are probably sitting there thinking, well, you know, I don't really see this change happening. You know, there's one person down my road who has a G-Whiz car, and you know, it's really just not going to be a big change. But if you actually look around London, if you go to Tate Modern, that's an old turbine hall. If you look at Battersea Power Station, there are many examples that if you think about things over a 20-year period, it's totally feasible for this type of significant change to happen. One of the other drivers that we're seeing is regulation, and specifically around the carbon agenda. And this is not necessarily tied to cost, but what we have found in a survey that we did of 250 CFOs in 14 different countries was they're getting very engaged with energy management and sustainability from a compliance and risk management point of view. So we did that survey both in 2011 and 2012, and that was actually with different sets of CFOs each time, and it was very clear that the type of regulations coming into effect, which require them to have data and require them to sign off on something saying this data is correct, has driven energy management further up the corporate agenda. And finally, the other big impact that we see is technology innovation. And this is a technology roadmap that we've developed. And this is just looking at smart grid technology, so just one category of technology innovation. So what is interesting, I think, around this technology innovation is just look at the clustering of technologies in that launch phase of the product life cycle. So of the 23 smart grid technologies that we analysed, you can see this kind of wave of innovation flowing into the market. And you can see on the vertical axis how increasingly these types of technologies are demonstrating that the way that they can benefit an organisation. Okay, so those are some of the 4 macro trends. We've got the prices, we've got the business model innovation, we have regulatory issues that involve the C-suite, and then we've also got this type of technology innovation. So let's turn to our survey data and see, well, what is actually happening in the corporate environment. And this is, again, a survey we conducted, 210 people involved in energy management in 11 different countries, and we looked at all industries, so going from the most energy intensive to the least. And one of the first things we wanted to know about was governance, because we constantly hear that one of the reasons why big transformational change doesn't happen in energy is because governance is not good enough. And you can see here 35% of the respondents says we actually have a global energy management strategy and central decision making. Now that's pretty rare, and what we found when we delved into the detail is it was actually smaller organisations in the sort of $250 million to $1 billion bracket who were doing that. But you can look at the other 61%, and you can see that that's still pretty fragmented. And we would say this is probably the biggest challenge in terms of improving operational financial performance. What about the future? Well, we wanted to know to what extent are you going to see change in how you manage energy? And you can see again, people are really thinking about this. 48% of the respondents said that there's either going to be significant or transformational change in the way they manage energy. Again, what's interesting is it is tending to be the less energy-intensive industries who are saying this, because in the past energy management has been rather untouched. But when we actually look at some of the specific things that organisations may be doing, you still have 88% saying data collection and reporting is very important or important. I think it's worthwhile just thinking about that for a second. I mean, what does that actually mean about where these organisations are on their journey? I'm sure all of you in the room have got involved in some of these messy, data collection challenges. What it really means is, and I think Ruben McGregor-Smith said this morning, so many organisations are still just trying to get their hands on the data to figure out what to do. Because if you look at the bottom of that chart, analytics, asset level energy management, demand response, people are not emphasising that so much. And the reason is because there's no point if you haven't got the data. So going back to the survey of 153 respondents attending this event, you've got a pretty similar type of list, I think, of focus areas. So improving operational energy efficiency. It's still pretty much some of the basic areas that are getting the focus, even if you see some of the newer things like reducing in-use intensity of products and on-site generation. So many organizations are really still starting their journey. And I think that's particularly the case in the next data I'm going to show you. So when we asked about on-site power generation across different categories, we asked to what extent is your firm investing in the following energy initiatives in the next 12 months. And we realized it was really important to understand at what scale, because frequently you hear, 75% of firms are doing this, but if it's one, micro wind turbine that people have lobbied the CEO to put on their corporate HQ, that's not really the sort of transformational change we're talking about. So if you look at this data, it's interesting to think of it, what is happening at an enterprise-wide level, and then what is happening at a multiple site level, as opposed to just pilot projects. And you can see there that some of the respondents are saying, well, between 1% and 6% are saying, we are doing these on-site power gen projects over the next 12 months enterprise-wide. That doesn't mean all of their energy is going to come from those sources. It just means that at all of their sites. Between 4 and 15% are saying for each category that we're going to do this for multiple sites. So that's the kind of positive bit. That's the area where things are really changing. Let's not forget, though, that 61% to 82%, depending on which type of on-site power gen you're looking at, are saying we're doing absolutely nothing. And I think this goes to Mark Lewis's point this morning about, well, where is that inflection point going to happen where everybody is deploying these technologies where it makes sense. Let me just wrap up then on the kind of corporate perspective. So we're seeing this shift from tactical management of energy to a more strategic approach. So firstly, where governance has been delegated down to a building manager or facilities manager in the past, we're starting to see a more centralized and coordinated approach. Secondly, last year we saw the launch of the ISO 50001 management system standard. Again, I think this is the basis to move from a rather informal approach to something that is much more significant. IT systems, we talked about technology innovation having an impact. So moving towards much more integrated systems for energy data collection and analysis. Investment plans we see moving from just being a siloed project to something which is much more programmatic. And that's critical to get the CFO involved. And that's really opening up issues around payback hurdles. So we've done a lot of research where people say, well, the payback is less than 3 years. Why can't I get funding for it? And the reason is because the cost savings are just too small. It's not interesting enough. And so when you have a program approach, not a project approach, it makes things much more interesting for the CFO. And then, we're also seeing, I think, in the energy services market, a lot of M&A activity because people are saying, well, it would be better to have a combination of Utilix and Mighty to deliver end-to-end services as opposed to buying from these organizations separately. So let me now just put some flesh on the bones of the idea of this integrated energy system. And we really see it as multiple energy domains that are integrated with information technology, electrical and mechanical systems. But you also need system-wide governance, and the whole point here is to improve operational and financial performance. So it gets pretty complicated, and I think the reason for that is because, as I said right at the start, we are talking about something that has trillions of endpoints. And so the research that we did found that you have to think about this building up from what we call energy domain. So a data center, for instance, a water treatment plant. So areas of operations that basically have the same kit, have the same processes, and have the same kind of financial performance and operational performance issues. It's a very, very complex environment. And then you take each of these individually, and we identified 9 different types of energy systems. And I think there are many others that you would have in your organizations. But I think, if you work for a retailer, if you work for a bank, if you work for a food and beverage company, I think you can start seeing, which of these types of energy systems would map to your organization. Let me just give you 3 examples at a large scale. So, firstly, the urban zone energy system. And this is a photograph of the basically a new build city in Korea, in the city of Incheon. They reclaimed 10,000 acres of land. It's a $35 billion project. And because it's basically a new build city, they've been able to integrate everything around energy, waste, and other services from the ground up in a master plan. And there are many kind of aspects of energy management that they've sought to integrate, with that master plan from the start. What about another example, a single site energy system? So New York City's Empire State Building could hardly be a more iconic building. $550 million refurbishment project that took place involving, as a key player, Johnson Controls. And, one of the things that they managed to achieve by integrating energy management was a 38% reduction in energy spend. So, a really impressive result by taking an integrated view. And then the final example, moving into the utility space. So this is PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, probably one of the most innovative utilities in the US. And what they've done is built a very large grid tie solar system, so deploying solar on around 32,000 homes in California. And again, this is so different from just doing it at the scale of a single house. So let me wrap up in terms of what this means from the point of view of how is this going to get done, I guess, is the question we asked ourselves. And the reality is very few organizations have the expertise and have the people, the technical skills, the business cases and methodologies to actually do this type of large-scale energy systems integration themselves. And that's why we see so much going on today in the energy services space. So again, going back to our survey group, we said, well, where is your spending going out of your energy budget? So this doesn't include spending on energy itself, just on energy management. And you can see it's around 47% on the left-hand side here, of spending is on consulting, support, and implementation. So in other words, we're already there. We are already very dependent on energy services firms to do this. And of course, some of them would also be selling equipment. So that is where all these end-to-end propositions are coming from to help you build large-scale systems. I don't want to be too nice, though, because at the end of the day, I think some organizations out there are not going to be able to deliver on some of these very large end-to-end propositions, and we can talk about that in the panel. And the reason for that is when you actually think about how complex the projects are and the programs, very few organizations will actually be able to do everything for you, because you need some brainy people, management consulting type people who will help you do strategy and financing over a 10-year period. You then need some really technical people who've got lots of knowledge of equipment to do the plans and then manage the whole series of projects. And then you need organizations who have both IT expertise as well as electrical and mechanical engineering expertise to integrate everything together. Not many of those around. And then finally, you have the kind of the software platform, a network operations center, and then people who can do kind of break, fix, and technical field services. So, not necessarily an easy type of value proposition for a single supplier to deliver on. So that said, I think I've laid down the gauntlet for the three panellists, and I'm very happy to hand over now to Brendan Tepley, who is going to be giving us the Eon perspective. Thank you very much.
Good morning, and thanks for the introduction, David. So, I'm sure you all know who Eon Energy are. You may not know that we're a major investor in renewable and low-carbon energy in Europe and the UK. So we invested $850 million in 2010 in the UK energy infrastructure and the grid, and we're looking to invest €7 million more by 2015. That covers a whole array of different technologies, from biofuel CHP to carbon capture and storage, smart grids, metering, electric vehicles, and I think some of the more intricate aspects of smart grids, such as the smart metering and smart appliances that are needed to manage demand-side consumption. I'm happy to say we're also making inroads at a corporate level within Eon. We have achieved a 9% carbon reduction in the last year, and that's against 50% carbon reduction by 2025 that we're aiming to achieve. We're also working with our supply chain to achieve a 10% carbon saving across the companies that we work with. So Eon Sustainable Energy is the company that I work for. It's a company within a company, 500 people within the business. We only started 4 years ago, so we're growing very rapidly. We have the sole mandate to save energy and carbon for our clients, so we work independently from our parent company. Many people find that surprising, but it is the case. We even have a separate client base and our own service offering independent. So I sit within the first little image on the left here, which is consultancy. So we have an end-to-end solution with energy infrastructure. So we're able to service the whole life cycle from upfront consultancy and design all the way through to funding, owning and operating assets. I think it's worth highlighting that within my part of the business, advisory services, consultancy is a key part of what we do. And secondly to that is a concept we title energy performance contracting. I won't go into detail on it today, but if you want to ask any questions, happy to take questions after. So why are we interested in distributed energy? Well, first of all, we're faced with an energy trilemma, where we have three challenges we're facing. First of all is reducing carbon emissions and the broader issue of climate change. The second issue of security of supply, and in addition to that, providing a balanced, safe and secure supply mix. Thirdly is keeping energy affordable. And essentially to do that, what we need is a smarter energy system or a smart grid system. So in conjunction with those challenges, we're faced with a large-scale decommissioning of nuclear and coal power on the grid. That's at least 33 megawatts due to be decommissioned by 2025. And in conjunction with that is an additional 35 megawatts of renewable energy that's due to come on the grid. And that's largely going to be from offshore and onshore wind. So clearly, to meet that challenge, we need a grid that's able to handle different types of distributed energy sources feeding onto the grid and into individual homes and businesses. Now, I guess another challenge to highlight is that the barriers to entry are changing. So we've gone from a traditional energy supply market where we've had high barriers to entry, high levels of investment required to invest in a combined cycle gas turbine, and indeed high levels of regulation governing how we do that. We're now moving to more of a decentralised energy form where numerous companies can get involved, can develop their own energy centre and export that back onto the grid. I think an interesting component to that is also storage and how we store renewable energy that's generated from a distributed source. We're seeing an increasing trend with solar power and I guess an increasing interest in investing in renewables in conjunction with businesses wanting to take more control of their energy supply on site. And some evidence of, I guess, what we see it being a mega trend with the smart grid concept is the Prime Minister in April announced a £100 million smart systems and heat program, which will effectively demonstrate the smart grid system on a large scale in the UK for the first time. I just want to quickly highlight at a city level, and this diagram illustrates how how a distributed energy system may look with a mixed balanced load of different types of loads. So from schools, day uses, night uses, commercial, office space, residential, and where we have a heat network connecting the different loads and a power export capability, but also we see with the industrial waste heat example the capability for a business to actually export back in the heat back onto the grid. The example I wanted to mention is Malmö, the city of Malmö in Sweden. It's a case study for us. It started out 20 years ago as an industrial wasteland, and we've completely retrofitted it, installed a number of energy centres, and it's now a case study looking at how you can have a whole suite of different microgeneration technologies, community energy solutions, and some smart grid principles. So smart metering is something we're now looking to install across the district. And we're working with the city of Malmö to look at the rest of its districts in terms of how we can help it adjust and prepare for the smart grid. So, I mean, Eon are involved in a whole array of necessary concepts and technologies to facilitate this change that we're seeing. We have to. There's no two ways about it. What is required, though, is a change in thinking to a whole systems thinking approach from what has been an isolated technical kind of approach. So rather than looking at a technical problem with a specific energy centre, we're looking at a whole system and how we can integrate the system. So from battery storage for renewable energy to generation, energy efficiency, making sure that customers have suitable intelligent systems on their homes and within businesses to make sure that we can manage the demand side consumption and feed that back onto the grid so that district network operators, DNOs, and indeed generation companies can intelligently take that data, use it, and locate the nearby, the closest energy point to the demand load. So I just wanted to highlight, I guess, give a bit of a glimpse for the future up to 2030. I've only got 5 minutes to talk, so it's quite a high-level, brief speech. But essentially what we see is that over the next 5 years, there's obviously going to be an increased take on energy efficiency because it has the biggest bang for the buck, increased electrification of transport and heat, and interestingly, potentially hydrogenation of transport, as that seems to be a technology that's the cost curves are improving in terms of the R&D. Distributed generation clearly is important and will continue to be so. Smart grid development up to 2020 is necessary and essential, and then we look to a more widespread deployment of distributed generation. By 2030, we think there'll be mass electrification and decarbonisation on the grid, and that's certainly that's reflected in some of DEC's energy survey reports. And indeed, we're Eon really shaping our business to play a key role and take advantage of those opportunities. So moving away from fossil fuel supply to really a low carbon generation business model. I think I'll just end that there's some opportunities. Firstly, policy reform at a European level, making sure that there's increased scope for optimisation of energy solutions across countries and potential integration of those energy supply grids. And I guess at a market dimension, making sure that the regulatory environment is sound and sufficient to make sure that it can encourage distributed energy generators to connect to the grid. That's all I've got time for at the moment, but I'm happy to take questions afterwards. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Clay Nessler. I'm with Johnson Controls. I'm responsible for energy and sustainability. And I'm going to give a little different kind of presentation. I'm actually going to tell a story for my 6 minutes and 31 seconds that Sue's going to remind me about. How many of you have heard of Ray Bradbury? The author, right? Science fiction writer, recently passed away, which is unfortunate. Hopefully some of you have read some of his books. He has a very famous quote. And his famous quote that I like to think about from time to time is that the future exists today, it's just not evenly distributed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to piece together over the next couple minutes a vision of the future, a story of what a smart enterprise, how it will act and how it will operate in the relatively near future. Everything I'm going to talk about has been done in either pilot, demonstration, or in practice somewhere around the world. But I think as you'll see towards the end, it certainly hasn't been integrated into an overall management philosophy. First off, I'd like to just thank the organizers and Verdantix. Great research. Agree with many of the conclusions, and hopefully this will support some of that. Now, I would call your attention to the chart down here, because that's going to be the constant element as we march through the day. What you're going to see here to ground you is here's the time, and then here is the profile of a typical energy use in a building that's part of an enterprise. Here is going to be the refined profile through the use of smart technology. And this is a little different kind of enterprise, because this is an enterprise that's in a world of continually varying energy prices. Okay? There are parts of the world, regions in the U.S. and elsewhere, that have continuously varying prices. Certainly in the wholesale, they vary on an hour-to-hour basis. But let's just imagine, if you will, that everywhere in the world across the portfolio, energy prices reflects the actual cost of generation at that particular time. Leads to some pretty interesting scenarios. So our story starts at 8 o'clock at night. This is a enterprise which has a number of buildings with thermal storage, ice storage. So the first thing our smart system does is it talks to the grid, talks to the weather service. It gets a prediction of the weather. It is a very detailed thermodynamic model of the building. It decides that it's going to be very hot, very humid, high cooling load. Therefore, it starts making ice like crazy, okay, in preparation for the next day. This is also a facility which has a number of electric vehicles, hopefully lots of electrical vehicles. We said near future. Who knows how far that future will be, but the vehicle fleet for this organization is plugged into charging stations, but they just don't immediately start charging. We're actually providing grid regulation services through those vehicles. It's monitoring the generation of wind in the North Sea and elsewhere, and it is charging those vehicles incrementally based on excess capacity. So not just charging off-peak, but actually providing services to the grid by taking that excess capacity and putting them in vehicles. We need a lot of vehicles, but once we have a lot of vehicles and smart charging, we can provide some very valuable services. At 2 o'clock, we start pre-cooling the building. It turns out we don't need ice storage or water storage. We can also provide cooling just in the mass of the building itself. We're going to need every bit of cooling we can for the next day, so we start pre-cooling the mass of the building so we can take advantage of that the next day as well. At 4 o'clock in the morning, we've got a problem. The chiller that's making the ice and storing it so we can melt it the next day has a failure. Now, typically, we might not even know there's a failure till the next day when the operator walks in the building or somebody's lucky enough to catch an alarm. But this particular chiller is smart. It detects its failure, diagnoses the failure. It looks for the cost of that failure, because tomorrow's a very hot day and we're going to need a lot of ice. That failure is very expensive. So it has a service agreement that automatically dispatches service that will go fix the chiller even without anybody knowing about it due to a prior agreement. Of course, by 7 o'clock, the chiller's been repaired, the valve, it's making ice again, the truck goes home, and the invoice gets sent to the customer. All is well again. At 8 o'clock, the employees start coming to work. They all have electric or plug-in electric hybrid vehicles as well. They plug into the charging station in the parking lot. But, you know, there's going to be a lot of demand across the grid that day. We want to charge them early in the morning, certainly not in the afternoon when the grid's going to be very challenged to meet those loads. And we might not charge them all the way to the top. The HR system knows how far the average commute is. So we're just going to top them up enough to get them home with a stop to the shop to get some milk and eggs for home. Okay? At 9 o'clock, work starts, meetings start. We know conference rooms. We know how many people are scheduled to be in a conference room. We start cooling it down just at the last minute so the conference room is comfortable. There's carbon dioxide sensors in the conference room. If all of a sudden it's a very popular meeting and lots more people come than are invited, like an announcement, the CO2 sensor detects that and it provides extra ventilation. If it's one of my staff meetings and no one shows up, it also detects that and reduces the ventilation to save energy. At 10 o'clock, the CFO gets a call from an analyst, somebody like Verdantix, and says, hey, what are you doing about your carbon commitments? And, you know, today the CFO gets a lot of calls from financial analysts. He goes to a dashboard, looks at the financials for the operations. Well, in the future, we're going to have the exact same information about our energy use, our carbon use, our water use. And it's going to be enterprise well. I'm ignoring you. At 11 o'clock, the price of electricity starts to increase, and the building starts to take action. The tenants in the building have already decided they're willing to take some discomfort and some action. Temperatures rise, the lights dim, and those actions are reported back to the utility because they're worth money. You can monetize those reductions, right? So in this particular case, there's information from the utility and the energy systems about the price. There's information back to say, what did the building actually do, so they can get incentives. At 12 o'clock, the price of energy continues to escalate. The building takes more action. Again, it's reported back. At 1 o'clock, an interesting aspect about a building of the future is we're going to know where the workstations are occupied. This is an actual picture from an actual building. And the little green dots are people that are actually in their workstations. Yellow are people who were there, but they're gone for about 15 minutes. And then the ones that are white are ones that people don't show up. Turns out most workstations aren't occupied most of the time. If you control the plug loads of the lighting there and the conditioning through the raised floor, you can save considerable energy. At 2 o'clock, we send out a message because we need to reduce more energy. And what you see here is people start unplugging their laptops, right? What's the ultimate plug-in hybrid? It's a laptop. It'll run for hours without being plugged in. Saves an incredible amount of plug load from recharging that battery just by unplugging it there. So we're going to get the employees in the operation. There's a lot of things that can go on in the data centers as well. No backups, put the servers on sleepy mode so they use less power. Lots that can be done. 3 o'clock, there's cloud cover. So this building obviously has PV, clouds go over there, but we have energy storage. We have batteries that will actually maintain a flat profile, so when the sun goes behind a cloud, we use energy from the battery. Sun comes out, we recharge the batteries. Almost done here. At about 4 o'clock, the facility director wants to keep track of how much energy some of the energy efficiency improvements have had over time. This is an actual data from a real enterprise facility where a retrofit was done, 5 years worth of work. The really neat thing there is they had about a 20% reduction through the retrofit and a 3% per year savings per year. That's actually computed on a daily and monthly basis. You can track it over time. Think of it as a negawatt meter that's, instead of telling you how much energy you used, it continuously tells you how much energy you saved. It's 5 o'clock, people start leaving the office. Of course, this guy left his lights on, left his computer on, but the security system knows he left, and about 10 minutes later, we start turning everything off so we're not wasting energy. At 7 o'clock, the custodial crew comes out and starts cleaning. Instead of lighting up the whole building for a couple hours while they clean, the individual floors that need to be cleaned are lit up. They flash the lights a couple minutes before the crew should be done, and it kind of follows them around the building. We've all seen buildings lit up like Christmas trees. There's no reason to do that. Finally, at 8 o'clock, the facility director is ready to go on vacation, and he pulls out his iPad, and he looks at the world portfolio, and he gets one last check at the status of all his buildings across the enterprise. And of course, he just sends command to his number 2. Most of the systems will be taken care of automatically, and he could dial in from anywhere on the planet to take any action, but he probably won't have to. That's it. Thanks. So for more information on this, you can go to our site, the Institute for Building Efficiency, where there's a lot more detail, and I look forward to joining the panel.
Clay, thank you very much. It's probably one of possibly the most entertaining presentation on energy management ever.
Thanks.
So
that's why I ignored Sue. Sue wanted me to stop.
Before I just had a question for you. If there's in your kind of highly integrated, automated system, is there a kind of energy management Dalek that comes out and zaps employees who do the wrong thing, like opening windows and not using revolving doors, or does this sort of factor in the big problem that I think everyone is familiar with, which is as soon as you put people into the mix, all sorts of things go wrong?
Yeah, 2 things are really important. And one thing you saw is a high degree of automation. That one site where we know, whether people are in their cubes or not, you have to use automation. I mean, training, awareness, education, motivation, those are all great things, right? But at some point, if people aren't in their workstation, you don't need those plug loads. You don't need the lights. You don't need to condition that little space. So you should use automation as much as possible so you're not forcing people to do something there. There is the other side, and that is the ability to provide the tenants and the occupants with information to help them make better behaviors. You showed the Empire State Building before. One of the most interesting aspects of the Empire State Building retrofit project is something called a Tenant Energy Management Portal, where each tenant within the 102-story Empire State Building gets a little website, their own little dashboard, and it shows their own energy use within their own office. And that's actually fairly rare. It's pretty typical. You get a bill, you pay it, it's prorated by square foot. You have no idea the energy you used or whether any of the education, training, or behavior changes actually have an impact. In this case, you look at 30-minute data within your own workspace, and you can compare it to the previous day, the previous week. You could compare it over time. And most importantly, it allows you to benchmark against other tenants. So we're already seeing little competitions, right? So if you're a lawyer on the 6th floor of the Empire State Building, you can compare yourself with every other law firm or professional services firm within the Empire State Building. And there are interesting little challenges going on. Who can save the most? It's sort of like the Biggest Loser kind of thing, right? So who can actually reduce their energy intensity of their space the most over 6 months? And they're challenging each other. And it's amazing going from just education to challenge and comparing yourself to peer groups is really driving a lot of additional savings. So that'd be the other element, I think, where you actually provide information to help people make better decisions.
Yeah, I think that's great. We're not just a problem, we're also able to contribute. I did want to introduce Ian Kelly at this stage, and the reason why I thought it'd be interesting to have him on the panel is he's come into the energy management world from an IT and telecoms background, and I think that is one of the themes that we see here in terms of the impact of IT and telecoms on creating these integrated systems. So, Ian, maybe you could give us your perspective in terms of what you've seen in terms of, let's say, some of the bad stuff that is going on in energy management, and how you see IT and telecom solutions helping fix those problems.
I think I'd rather start off with the good things. I have a very clear vision for where I see the market going, or the energy services market going, and for me it's energy management over IP. We spent a lot of time with connected environments, and I'm sat here laughing out. We get our embedded domain players get very excited about data. We're doing things today we did 15 years ago in IT. I'm just thinking, whoopee. But the reality of it is, for me, there's a lot of quick wins on creating smart energy cloud, if you will, today. And the way we're pushing forward with our clients is particularly around that. So connected, there's 3 networks in the building. You've got voice, IT, and energy. Energy is largely ignored and orphaned unless you are a manufacturer, because it's treated as a cost of sale. What we want to do is bring that to life, and that investment's already there. But what you typically find, coming on to the bad things, it's unloved, not really in service, not connected. But where we are today in terms of connectivity cost is as low now as it's ever been. Get it connected, put it into the cloud. Once it's into the cloud, project track real-time investments. That really works. Just getting things switching on and off at the right time and getting the right set point. Dead easy to do. One quick example, 10 main employment sites, trimmed 13,500 hours off plant, £250,000 a year saving. Easy. But what you typically find is you've got a reluctant energy management team, and you're doing a lot of education, and you also find, particularly unless they're early adopters like some of the main retailers and big energy spends, there's this view that I've got an energy service, and it really is just procurement. So my view of the future is energy management over IP.
Great. Okay, thank you. I think it would be interesting if we could start thinking about some questions from the audience. I mean, if we could get into some practical things in terms of some of the systems maybe that you operate, and where you think you could see this kind of integrated approach being beneficial. So do we have any questions, or do people need to ruminate? I've scared everybody off now. Okay, we've got one here at the front.
Hi, Steve Roberts from Myriad CG. We're an on-site renewable energy provider. One of the things, the issues that we see is that people get the buildings that they're delivered. The buildings are either leased or they're buying them from a developer. And the M&E that's put in there at the time the building is built is done to a price. It's a design and build contract. So although you want to do all these things, you get in your building and the stuff is incapable. How do big corporations drive to get higher quality buildings in the first place so they can actually do some of the stuff that Ian's talking about?
Maybe we could start with Brendan, if you can comment on that.
Yep. Well, I think to start with, we've got a target in the UK for, I think it's 2019, for UK smart grid rollout across all new builds, I understand it. And in conjunction with that, Eon are investing in 1 million metre, installing 1 million metres by 2014. So we're trying to work ahead of the curve and basically phase ourselves in, so 1 million up to 2014 and, an additional amount several years after that. So I think key is obviously, we touched on this in the presentations, with the metering is essential. We can talk about smart grid and smart domains and systems, but really what it's all about is managing the demand side more so than we have done, because it's really traditionally been focused on generating, from a centralised power supply focus. So we need to get the metering right, and I think the government is supportive of that, and the current government certainly is investing in some headline R&D schemes to champion smart grid systems, and the metering regulation, I think, is encouraging. Probably gives us a bit more leeway than maybe is necessary, but I think that's important and key before we kind of get into any of the more heavy-duty smart grid technology.
Can I just quickly add to that? The main issue on new build, and a lot of what you find, is the British mentality: lowest cost, not lifetime cost. That's the issue. So what you find is you've got the bare bones and you've got it all there. You just need to optimise it. And just to put a quantum on it, I'm not talking theory here. We've got 31,000 locations connected in our cloud, which I believe is probably the biggest in the UK, I would think. So you can do it. It's there. It just needs optimising. And then when you find out how your estate's managed, if you've got a large estate, because the market's early stage, or the way an M&E's grown up, you've got a lot of regional players attacking it, no joint-up global strategy. And so what you end up with is just a mess that needs sorting out. Once the mess is sorted, you'd be surprised what you could do without spending big bucks. You can do quite a lot.
Can I? I think building on that, there's a big question which I'd like to put to you around financing and retrofits, because that does seem to be one of these, barriers in the whole market, where who's going to pay for it over what time, especially when you're not talking about owner-occupiers. What kind of work are you doing that could help people get over that hurdle?
Yeah, particularly in commercial or investor-owned buildings, there's a real challenge. There's misaligned incentives. So there's the classic problem where if the building owner makes the improvements, the tenants get the benefits, so the owner's unlikely to do it. Or depending on different lease structures, the owner gets all the benefits, the tenant gets none. So there are things called green leases, which try to align the incentives between the owner and the tenant, certainly. There are a number of kind of innovative financial structures, some of which we may talk about later. One really takes infrastructure improvements and converts it into an energy service. So instead of a capital project, essentially the infrastructure is being installed in the building. It may be owned by a third party, a special purpose entity, or by the energy service company, and essentially the benefit of that installation is provided as a service to the owner. Think of it as a power purchase agreement. Many people invest in solar as a power purchase agreement, where they have a long-term contract to buy energy at a certain price and essentially lease their roof to a third party, which puts up the solar system, and then they get the beneficial use. Think of this as something analogous for efficiency. There are other innovative models. One that was originated in the United States is called property assessed clean energy financing. The idea is to pay for the infrastructure improvements as a lien on the property tax. One really nice thing about property taxes is no matter what your lease is, they get passed through to the tenants. A lien on a property tax survives a change in ownership. So if someone, investor-owned buildings get flipped, right? 3 to 5 years, they sell it to somebody else to get the tax benefits and other capital appreciation. this infrastructure charge would get carried over to future tenants. In many cases, these liens can be senior to the mortgage, so third parties like to finance and invest in these type of buildings, and that's a very, very powerful concept. Started in Berkeley, California for solar, has now spread to all types of efficiency in commercial and residential, and the best program is probably actually in Melbourne, Australia now, where it's a key component of the Melbourne 1200 project to renovate 1,200 commercial buildings in Melbourne. So these are things that are being considered as part of the Green Deal. These are things that are emerging, and I think is a key enabler to those type of investments.
Right. Thank you. And so I just want to do a quick show of hands on this. Who in the audience actually thinks their organisation is on this journey from tactical to strategic management of energy, where you can actually think about some projects and so on that it is about this sort of integration? If we could just see a show of hands. So that's great. And would anybody be willing to volunteer an example in the middle there? Would it be possible?
Thank you, Henri Winant, CEO of Intelligent Energy. Well, our business is actually to deliver that to our customers, so it's no surprise that we would have to do that for ourselves as well. Only yesterday I was there in Scotland, opening a joint venture that we have with Scottish and Southern Energy to deliver that model to more the masses, if I could put it like this. So, I mean, the specifics of it are very much about, firstly, understanding the business model, understanding what the financial and technical risk is, and usually it's about the servicing costs that you need to focus on and make sure that the automation of that servicing cost doesn't destroy the overall business case. Once you understand these three things, the rest is making sure that the customer understands the value stack. Selling megawatts is, as you put it earlier, is a concept that quite often people don't appreciate. They can appreciate once they're starting to see the bottom line performance, but until they've seen it, it's not very tangible. So you need to do quite a lot of work there. But it certainly is eminently doable, and particularly when you come back to your presentation earlier with the compound annual growth of energy, and you actually put that in terms of cost of sale, and I like the unloved infrastructure analogy earlier of energy being unloved. Once you start to see that putting a bit of love and attention and care on that part of the infrastructure gives you very big paybacks, then suddenly people are saying, well, where do I sign next? But first you need to get the first three things: servicing, the right technology, and make sure they understand value stack.
Great. Thank you very much. So I think maybe to so slowly running out of time here, I thought it'd be useful to hear from each of the panel members on a specific question. So, looking at the next 5 years, and we'll start with you, Ian. I mean, where do you think organisations are really going to be able to get to on this journey?
I think a lot of organisations kid themselves into focusing on future truths and fantasies that we all theorise about, but get back to practicality. Look at what you've got, get it into good shape, which to me is getting it connected, get good optics across that estate, and understand your real-time consumption, understand all your investments that you're making into that estate, project track it real-time, and making sure it's in good shape and fit for purpose. Because as and when new technology evolves, you've got a fit-for-purpose platform to work from, because most people are just not fit for purpose. They're a mess. And that's the reality of it. And we've worked long and hard with a number of our key clients, and one of them's in the room today. It took us several years to get that into good shape, and they've invested heavily. But that's driven our behaviour. You have to deliver, and be careful whoever you invest with, and make sure that you see that ROI. And it's shocking the number of people who spend multi-million pounds on infrastructure and have no idea how to track the ROI.
Okay, sounds like sort of best practices for
best
management
practice.
101.
Get your house in order, get your energy cloud sorted, and make sure that you track your investments. Because at the end of the day, if I was a finance director, some of the conversations I have, I won't be giving the property team any more cash.
Okay, ending on that high note then. Brendan, in 5 years' time, I mean, when you think about the organisations you're working with, and indeed Eon as well, to what extent is this idea of large-scale systems integration going to be a reality?
Mm-hmm. I think there's three things. First of all, building from Ian's point, with a technical solution, we're finding right now that what our customers ask for is just to give them a carbon footprint, a carbon management plan for their site. So to develop a baseline and identify how they can save energy and carbon quickly. And it is down to energy cost savings. Carbon savings are nice to have, especially for businesses in the EU ETS and the CRC. But essentially, that kind of advisory work is what is most in demand. I think that will continue following the trend of the energy performance contracting, which is really taking off. And that and our community energy side of our business in building energy centres, distributed energy centres, are both growing astronomically. We've gone from 0 to 500 staff in 4 years. So I think the EPC market, and Clay referred to it, by the way, and that's one of a model that has started in the US along with the tax initiative, where we can, more effectively a client can fund an investment on its own balance sheet, or it can offset that to another party, which Eon can take on the role. So effectively we can take all the risk for the investment. And I think Johnson Controls are doing some similar type work with clients. So it's something which really has a lot of legs because it means no money and no risk for the investment. That's the funding or financing side. And then I think with a future vision with technology, demand response is something we're looking at closely, as is the government, because we think it has legs and there's an opportunity to sink in with basically demand side management to make, along that theme of it's not really about supply anymore. Increasingly so, it's going to be more about looking at the demand on site and how can we manage that smartly to save money. So we're working with customers now to trial some demand response. We've got 3 megawatts allocated on different projects, and indeed we're looking for some more trials, so if anyone's interested, let me know. Electric vehicles and smart energy efficiency are other initiatives we're looking at.
Okay, great, thanks. So, I think that is an interesting point around the financing options, but we did actually ask that question in our survey, and it is incredible how low the penetration is of any kind of innovative financing of energy projects. It is still pretty much coming straight out of discussions with the CFO, so we don't see much uptake of those creative mechanisms. So let's wrap up with Clay. What's in 5 years' time, what do you expect will have happened? Is your day in the life going to be a reality anywhere at the JCI headquarters in Milwaukee, maybe?
Well, actually, a lot of the elements in the day of life are actually happening, and I think you know about our headquarters. We have 4 LEED Platinum buildings. It's the highest concentration of LEED Platinum buildings, one of which is 1 point away from being the highest rated platinum building in the world, actually, where we've implemented a lot of this. But I'd like to focus on 2 other areas. One, I'd like to reinforce Brendan's comment about energy performance contracting. Fortunately or unfortunately, I was in the United States when this kind of got invented in 1985. Schools in Ohio wanted a way to pay for lighting retrofits, and they kind of invented this model where you'd pay for the infrastructure improvements through savings. 25 years later, it's $5-6 billion US business, and it serves the public sector. And it's always been kind of confusing as to why this model hasn't, achieved greater success. It's very strong in Australia. It's becoming stronger in the UK. It is strong in Germany. So I think it offers a lot of advantages, rarely applied in the private sector. The Empire State Building is a performance contract. It was funded. It's guaranteed for 15 years. It provides, it had a 3-year payback, so it meets that magic payback threshold for private sector customers. But to address the private sector, there's a practice which we're beginning to see that I would hope in 5 years becomes dominant, and you had it on your slide. That's CFOs looking at their portfolio as a portfolio. Organizations which take all of their projects, all of their energy efficiency improvements, and when they blend together the low-hanging fruit, the VFD replacements, the lighting, the tuning, the retro-commissioning, and they combine it with renewable energy, equipment replacement, modern controls and automation, when they look at a blend of those projects on a portfolio basis based on the return on investment and the cost for reduced carbon, much the way Steve Howard thinks about it from IKEA. When you look at it as a portfolio, it's a big enough number that it gets the attention of the CFO. And we found that organizations that take a portfolio approach invest far more, up to 3 times more than they would, and get a much, much greater financial return. So This is part hope and part thinking it'll happen, is that more and more organizations, when they've harvested all the low-hanging fruit and they have to get out the ladder, and they have to reach taller on the tree, they're going to start using different internal financial practices, funding those improvements as a portfolio. Probably the single biggest thing that could get greater improvements.
Great. Well, we'll end on that single biggest thing then. So I've been getting the red traffic light for a while here. So thank you all very much indeed for listening to our panel. Ian Kelly from Matrix, Brendan Tapley from Eon, and Clay Nesler from Johnson Controls. So thank you all very much to the panelists.